What would you do if one day they told you that your country, the one that has fought for centuries for its independence and identity, was at risk of being overwhelmed by an immigration crisis that seems to have no solution? But suddenly, from having more than 40,000 attempts by immigrants to practically zero, Poland, a country with a history full of resilience and struggle, found itself in the middle of a migratory storm that threatened to destabilize not only its economy, but also its social fabric and politics. But the most surprising thing isn't the crisis itself, but rather how Poland managed to overcome it so effectively that the rest of Europe began to look on with admiration, even with hate. How was it possible? What decisions did they make? And why is this story much more relevant than you can imagine? Stay until the end, because I assure you that Poland's solution to this crisis is not only fascinating, but also an example of what a country can do when facing monumental adversity. It all started almost imperceptibly during 2015, when the European Union was experiencing one of the greatest migratory crises in its history due to the conflicts in the Middle East and Africa. Poland didn't seem to be the epicenter of the problems. While countries like Germany, France, or Italy were receiving thousands of refugees, Poland maintained a more cautious stance. But as the years passed, something began to change. Poland, with its strategic location between Eastern and Western Europe, began to experience a gradual increase in the arrival of illegal immigrants. The turning point came in 2020. In that year, more than 30,000 immigrants tried to cross the Polish borders illegally, and the following year, that figure surpassed 40,000 attempts, representing a 300% increase compared to previous years. The majority of these immigrants came from conflict regions like Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, using dangerous routes from Belarus and Ukraine to reach Western Europe. However, what many did not expect was that Poland would face this problem with a strategy that, in hindsight, was incredibly effective. So much so that its results will surprise you. But first of all, the impact of the migratory crisis in Poland was quickly noticeable. The first affected areas were economic. As immigrants arrived, the reception centres at the borders were quickly overwhelmed. Government resources allocated to humanitarian assistance, which were already limited, were rapidly exhausted. This led to increased pressure on the social welfare system, which had to serve not only Polish citizens, but also a growing population of immigrants arriving without jobs, and in many cases, without documentation. Unemployment, although not initially an issue, began to raise concerns in some rural areas. Local workers felt that the arrival of immigrants put their jobs at risk, especially in sectors like construction and agriculture, where unskilled labour was in high demand. But the economy wasn't the only affected area. Politically, the migration crisis became a central topic of debate. The far right quickly gained support by using immigration as its main rhetorical weapon. On the other hand, progressive parties advocated for a more inclusive and humanitarian policy, which created deep divisions in the political landscape. In terms of cultural identity, immigration posed an even greater challenge. Poland, a country with a strong Catholic tradition and a history marked by struggles for its independence, viewed the arrival of people from very different cultures and religions with suspicion. For many Poles, immigration was perceived as a threat to their way of life, their language, and their customs. Suddenly, the story takes an unexpected turn. So much so that thanks to the measures I'm about to tell you about, in the first year of implementing these measures, illegal crossings decreased by 60%. Instead of falling into chaos or completely closing its borders, Poland took a series of steps that surprised many international observers. These measures, far from being extreme or radical solutions, proved to be a pragmatic and, most importantly, effective approach. One of the first actions taken by the government was to drastically reinforce border security. State-of-the-art surveillance systems were implemented, including drones, thermal cameras, and motion sensors along the most vulnerable borders. Additionally, a high-security fence was built along the border with Belarus, one of the main entry points for illegal immigrants. This barrier, which stretched for several kilometers, was designed not only to stop illegal crossings, but also to send a clear message. Poland was taking the protection of its borders seriously. The results were immediate. Immigrants stopped coming. This was a significant achievement, but the Polish government knew that border control alone would not be enough to solve the crisis sustainably. The next step was to launch an ambitious immigration regularization program. Instead of adopting a closed-door policy, Poland decided that immigrants who could prove to be skilled workers or who were willing to integrate into Polish society could receive temporary residence permits. To do so, they had to commit to working in specific sectors where there was a labour shortage, such as construction, agriculture, and the technology industry. But regularization was not enough. The government also implemented social integration programs. Free Polish language classes were offered to immigrants, as well as workshops on the country's culture and history. This facilitated the integration of newcomers into local communities and reduced social tensions. Do you think there's more? This is just the beginning. In addition to the measures mentioned earlier, Poland implemented a series of additional actions to curb immigration and better manage the migration crisis. These strategies focused on various areas, both at the national level and in collaboration with other European countries. First, bilateral agreements with countries of origin and transit. Poland signed agreements with countries like Ukraine, Belarus, and Georgia to strengthen cooperation in the fight against illegal immigration. These agreements included improving information sharing mechanisms, training border officials, and creating joint patrols in the most vulnerable areas. International collaboration was key to dismantling human trafficking networks operating on migration routes to Poland. Additionally, strict legislative reforms. The Polish government introduced a series of legal reforms that tightened asylum and residency policies. The procedures for reviewing asylum applications were accelerated, reducing wait times and quickly deporting those who did not meet protection criteria. Finally, Poland launched informational campaigns in countries of origin aimed at potential migrants. Through local media and social networks, the Polish government warned about the dangers of trying to enter the country illegally and explained strict immigration policies. The strengthening of security forces' capabilities was another important step. Poland significantly increased resources allocated to security forces and the border agency. More officers were hired, training was improved, and borders were equipped with advanced technology to detect illegal crossings. These strategies, combined with those mentioned earlier, allowed Poland to take control of its migration situation and significantly reduce the number of illegal entries into the country. As government policies began to bear fruit, the results were not only reflected in economic figures, but also in Poland's social fabric. If you found this analysis on how Poland handled the immigration crisis interesting, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. In this space, we continue to explore the most important topics affecting global politics and the economy. And believe me, what's coming will be even more fascinating.